The Eagle's Dust Bar sat on the very edge of the Redstone military base, so old and worn that it felt like it had been standing there before the Marine Corps even had its first rifles. Its nicotine-stained walls had witnessed more broken careers, more drunken fights, and more bruised egos than any command center ever would. It was loud inside, as always. A mix of laughter, arguments, clinking glasses, and the restless energy of men who lived in a world where tomorrow was never guaranteed. Some celebrated promotions, others drowned failures, and a few simply escaped the weight of memories they never spoke about. But tonight, all eyes kept drifting toward one man, Major Mason King. He was the type of officer who walked into a room and expected admiration as naturally as he expected oxygen. Perfect uniform, perfect posture, perfect arrogance. He had the cold confidence of someone who'd never had to prove himself outside of paperwork and training grounds. A small entourage of junior officers flocked around him, laughing just a bit too loudly at his jokes, trying to ride in the shadow of his rising star. King took a sip of whiskey, casually scanning the room, until his gaze stopped on a single old man sitting alone near the window. The man wore a simple dark coat, hunched slightly, with a glass of water and a small metal badge resting on the table in front of him. King nudged the lieutenant beside him. "Who's that guy supposed to be?" Lieutenant Rogers shrugged dismissively. "Probably just some retiree. Shows a veteran card, gets a discount. They wander in all the time," King smirked. "Why's he sitting alone? Doesn't look like much." One of the younger officers chuckled. "He's nobody, sir. Maybe a cook or a mechanic." "A cook?" King grinned wider. "Well, let's entertain ourselves, shall we?" His entourage exchanged uneasy glances. They knew when King got bored, someone always ended up humiliated. He strutted over to the old man's table, wearing the smug look of a man who believed his rank was a crown. King tapped a finger on the tabletop. "Hey, old-timer, I don't see any rank on you. Who exactly are you? What was your rank back in the day?" The old man slowly raised his eyes. They were pale, calm, but behind them was something King didn't bother to recognize. "Rank," he said with a soft smile. "Haven't had one for a long time, son. So, you're nobody." King raised his voice, drawing attention from nearby tables. The old man didn't answer. He calmly took a sip of water. "Then, why are you sitting in a military bar?" King pressed. "This place is for people who actually served, not for—" He paused dramatically, choosing the insult. "Tourists." Someone snorted nervously. The old man sighed, not offended, not angry, just tired. "Son, sometimes silence is a higher rank than anything you'll ever wear." That hit King harder than an insult. "You mocking me?" King leaned closer. "I'll ask one more time. Who are you? What was your rank? I want to know what gives you the right to sit at this table." The old man's eyes drifted to the small metal badge lying in front of him. A badge without a ribbon, without shine, but heavy with history. Just a man who did his job. "Your job?" King laughed. "What was it? Stirring soup? Painting ship hulls?" Several Marines at the bar snapped their heads toward the commotion. A few froze. A few whispered. Some already knew exactly who King was insulting. But King didn't. The old man leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Son, you wouldn't have survived a single day doing my job." King scoffed, but before he could retort, he barked toward the counter. "Colonel Webster, sir, could you come here for a moment?" Colonel Webster, a decorated, well-respected officer, turned and walked toward them with slow, authoritative steps. When he reached the table, King straightened like a cadet at inspection. "Sir, this man refuses to identify himself, claims he's nobody. I believe he has no right to sit in a military-only facility." The colonel's expression shifted instantly. He looked at King, then at the old man, and suddenly, his posture tightened, and he snapped into a perfect salute. Not casual, not polite. A salute given only to men whose names rewrote history. The bar went dead silent. King blinked rapidly, unsure what he was witnessing. Colonel Webster lowered his hand and spoke with steel in his voice. "Major King, you will apologize. Immediately." To General James Reed, former CENTCOM commander. The whiskey glass slipped from King's hand and shattered on the floor. It was as if all the blood drained from his face. The nobody, the tourist, the cook, was a man whose decisions shaped entire wars. General Reed sat quietly, unmoved by the spectacle. Colonel Webster continued sharply. "If you ever studied a single operation from the last 30 years, you'd know his face. You'd know he saved thousands of American lives before you even learned how to button your uniform." Whispers spread through the bar like wildfire. Major King tried to speak. "Sir, General, I didn't know. Reed lifted a hand gently. "It's fine, son. Knowledge is part of service, too." But in his voice, there was no anger, only fatigue, and something very close to sorrow. Major Mason King stood frozen, like someone had ripped the ground out from under him. His entourage scattered backwards, trying to look busy, look innocent, look anywhere but at the man they'd mocked. General James Reed simply adjusted his coat and folded his hands over the small, worn badge on the table. He didn't bask in the attention. He didn't smirk. He didn't even look offended. He looked tired. And that somehow made the room feel even smaller. Colonel Webster turned to King, voice a muted growl. "Major, when a man removes his rank pins, it doesn't erase the years that earned them." King swallowed hard. "Sir, I deeply apologize. I didn't realize—" "No, son," Reed said softly. "You didn't ask." He tapped lightly on the table once. The gesture wasn't hostile. It was just punctuation, gentle, final, heavy as a judge's gavel. The bar stayed silent, as if the air itself didn't dare move without permission. Reed finally looked up at King. "Do you know why officers sometimes stop wearing their rank after retirement?" King shook his head. "Because the people who need to know it already do." A few older Marines in the room lowered their eyes. They knew exactly what he meant. "And the ones who don't know it," Reed continued, "usually aren't ready to understand it anyway." King felt the blow, even though Reed's tone stayed calm and level. The major tried again. "General Reed, sir, I've studied CENTCOM operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. I never saw your name. I didn't see—" Reed exhaled slowly. "The most important names never show up in open sources." He picked up the small metal badge, not polished, not ceremonial. Something so plain it would be ignored by anyone who didn't recognize the weight behind it. "This isn't a decoration," he said quietly. "It's a reminder of men who didn't come home, and of decisions I'll spend every night remembering until the last when I live." The colonel bowed his head for a moment. King's jaw trembled. All that swagger, all that polished ego, evaporated like mist under sunlight. "Sir, why didn't you say who you were?" Reed blinked slowly. "Why would I? I came here to drink water, not to command a battalion." Someone in the back let out a nervous breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but no one joined him. Reed continued. "You know the problem with rank, Major. When you wear it too tightly, it blocks your vision. And you start thinking the world owes you respect just because of what's on your shoulders, not because of what's in your chest." King lowered his eyes. Reed leaned back as if studying the major not with judgment but with a surgeon's clarity. "Tell me, son, How many times have you spoken to a veteran without asking his name? King hesitated. I don't know, sir. That's the problem. You didn't want to know. You only wanted to measure him. A heavy shift went through the room. Even the lights seemed dimmer. Reed's voice dropped even lower. Let me tell you something about men who've lived long enough to sit alone in a bar. If they wanted you to know what they've done, they'd wear a billboard, not a quiet coat. He set the badge back on the table. The ones who don't brag are the ones you should fear disappointing most. King looked like he'd been punched, but not physically. Something deeper, something that reached past uniform and bone. But Reed wasn't finished. He nodded toward the major's pristine uniform. You think rank makes you respected? King stayed silent. Reed's answer was almost a whisper. Respect isn't worn. It's earned, and it can be lost faster than a glass slipping from your hand. The broken shards of King's whiskey glass still glimmered on the floor like fallen ranks. Reed tapped his badge once more, then folded it into his palm. Major, you judged a man by what he didn't show. That tells me everything I need to know. About what you haven't earned yet. King's throat tightened. Sir, what should I do? Reed held his gaze with a strange, quiet gentleness. Start by treating every old man in this bar like he might have carried you off a battlefield you didn't survive. A tremor passed through King's expression. Shame, regret, realization. Reed continued. And next time, ask a man's name before you ask his rank. Colonel Webster stepped forward. General Reed, would you like to move to a private table? Reed smiled faintly. No need. A man shouldn't hide from humility, any more than from danger. He reached for his glass of water. Besides, it's been a while since I've seen a room learn a lesson without a drill instructor yelling at them. A few officers shifted awkwardly. Some cracked the smallest hints of smiles. Some simply stared at Reed, with an awe they didn't know they were capable of. King stood there, breath shallow, as if every ounce of status he had built evaporated in front of a man who didn't even need a uniform to outrank him. Reed finally nodded toward the empty chair across from him. Sit, Major. If you're going to learn, you might as well start tonight. King hesitated, then sat down. The entire bar watched in stunned silence as one of the highest-ranking commanders in American military history began speaking softly to a man who had mocked him minutes earlier. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of something King had forgotten existed in leadership, purpose. The bar slowly returned to motion. Quiet conversations, muted clinks of glass, but every eye still drifted toward the corner table where Major King now sat across from General James Reed. Not that Reed acted like a general. He didn't issue commands. He didn't lecture. He didn't dominate the space. He simply occupied it, like a mountain occupies a horizon. Calm, steady, immovable. King sat stiffly, staring at the water in his glass as if afraid to breathe too loudly. Reed watched him for a moment. Relax, son. I'm not here to write your obituary. King swallowed. With respect, sir. I'm not sure I deserve to relax. Reed chuckled, a low, tired sound that carried decades of dust and sand with it. Deserving's a slippery word. Best not to use it too often. He leaned back slightly, his expression softening. You remind me of someone. King glanced up. A young lieutenant I once served with. Sharp jaw, sharper tongue. Thought he could size up a man by the shine on his boots. What changed him? King asked quietly. Reed exhaled through his nose. Baghdad. A market bombing. A little girl he carried 12 blocks to a medic who couldn't save her. A long silence followed. Loss makes you look at people differently, Reed added. Especially the quiet ones. King stared down at his hands. General, may I ask something? Go ahead. Why did you retire so quietly? You could have had a staff, a foundation, a book deal. Hell, a wing of the Pentagon named after you. Reed's brow lifted. And for what? So I could feel important? He shook his head. Importance fades. Impact doesn't. He tapped the old badge in his palm, thumb brushing over the worn metal. Men like me don't retire to be remembered. We retire to stop remembering. King froze. Reed continued, voice softer now. Every star on my shoulder came with a funeral. Every decision I signed came with a name I had to write a letter to a mother about. He looked King in the eye. Would you want a parade for that? King had no answer. Reed looked down at his glass. Half-empty water, untouched. I come here, Major, because it's one of the few places where no one salutes me. Where I can forget the sound of radios cutting out mid-sentence. Where I can pretend, for a few minutes, that I didn't send young men into darkness. King's jaw clenched. Sir, I'm sorry, Don't apologize. Reed interrupted gently. Ignorance isn't a crime. Staying ignorant is. He lifted the glass and took a small sip. Tell me something, Major. How many enlisted men do you know by name? King blinked. I know my platoon sergeant and, Reed raised an eyebrow. And? King exhaled slowly. Not enough, sir. Reed nodded. That's where leadership begins. With knowing the people who'd bleed for you. Before you ask them to. He leaned forward slightly. The military runs on two things, discipline and humility. You have the first. You're missing the second. King lowered his head. I see that now. Reed studied him carefully. Good. Most men don't until they've already broken something they can't fix. A quiet moment passed between them. Uncomfortable, honest, human. Then Reed's attention lifted toward the doorway. A young Marine stood there, nervous as a rabbit spotting a hawk. Private Hale. Barely 20. Reed nodded to him. Come here, son. Hale stepped forward, boots clicking too loudly. Yes, sir. How old are you? Reed asked. 20, sir. Reed hummed thoughtfully. Got someone waiting for you back home? Hale hesitated. My mom, sir, and my little sister. Reed's expression softened even more. Does she know what you do? Mom thinks I'm still a mechanic, sir. A small smile touched Reed's face. Smart boy. Mothers don't need truths that keep them awake at night. Hale swallowed and nodded. Reed looked him over, shoulders too tight, hands fidgeting. You nervous? A little, sir. Reed shook his head gently. Being nervous means you understand the cost of failure. That's good. King watched, perplexed. Reed continued to Hale. Do me a favor, son. Yes, sir. Look after this major. He's got a lot to learn, and good sergeants don't grow on trees. King's eyes widened in surprise. Hale nodded proudly. Yes, sir, I will. Reed nodded him away with a soft wave. When Hale left, Reed said quietly, That boy would die for you. King's throat tightened. Then I have to be worth dying for. Reed's eyes warmed. Now you're starting to sound like an officer, he paused. Tell me, Major, you ever wonder why older vets sit alone? King shook his head. Reed sighed softly. Because when you live long enough, you run out of people who understand what your silence means. The words hit King harder than any reprimand. Reed continued. You mocked an old man tonight, but in a few decades, if you're lucky, you'll be that man. And you'll pray the young ones look at you with respect, not comedy. King looked down. Reed spoke gently. Leadership isn't about who stands tallest. It's about who carries the weight when no one else can. The major's voice cracked. I want to do better, sir. Reed reached across the table and placed the badge between them, not offering it, just showing it. The metal glinted under the dim bar lights. Then start with this truth. The strongest men I ever commanded never bragged. Never raised their voices, never strutted. He tapped the badge once, barely making a sound. They didn't have to. The silence that followed was deep, reverent, grounding. King finally whispered, "General, what happened to your team? The one this badge represents?" Reed's eyes drifted, past the bar, past the walls, past the years. They died in a desert storm the world never learned about. And every night since, I sit with them a little while before I fall asleep. King said nothing. What could he say? For the first time in his military career, Major Mason King truly understood how small a rank insignia was, compared to the weight of a life. The bar had nearly emptied by the time Major Mason King walked out into the night air. The street was quiet, lamps humming, flags barely shifting in the coastal breeze. But inside his chest, everything was still shaking. He wasn't the same man who walked in 3 hours ago. Not after sitting with General James Reed. Not after hearing the kind of truths that strip a man down to his bones. He stood on the sidewalk, staring into the dark, trying to steady the storm inside him. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Major." King turned. Reed stood just outside the bar door, shoulders relaxed, hands behind his back. He wasn't wearing his medals, his stars, or even a nameplate. Just a simple old jacket. He looked almost ordinary, but the weight behind him never left. "Walking back to base?" Reed asked. "Yes, sir." "Walk with me." They headed toward the dimly lit road that led past the marina, boots tapping quietly in rhythm with the night. For a while, neither spoke. Then Reed said, almost casually, "Do you know the most dangerous moment in a military career, Major?" King thought for a second. "Combat deployment." "No." Reed shook his head. "The moment a man starts believing his own image, starts thinking he's untouchable, starts confusing confidence with superiority." He glanced at King. "I have seen more lives ruined by arrogance than by enemy fire." King swallowed. "Sir, I think I was heading that way." "Was," Reed corrected. "Tonight you turned around." They kept walking. The base lights shimmered in the distance like stars reflected in water. Reed slowed. "You know, you remind me so damned much of myself at your age, it's almost annoying." King almost smiled. "I doubt that, sir." "Oh, don't. I had the same jawline, the same stupid haircut, and the same belief that rank meant something more than responsibility." He sighed. "Took me years to understand that the greatest thing a leader can be is human." They reached the bench overlooking the marina. Reed sat first. King followed. The ocean whispered below them, soft, steady, eternal. Reed looked at him with the expression of a man measuring not the soldier, but the soul. "Let me tell you one last thing, Major. Something I never say unless a man is ready to hear it." King straightened instinctively. Reed continued, "There will come a day when you freeze. Not because you're weak, because you suddenly understand the cost of choosing wrong." He turned his gaze back toward the water. "That moment will define you, not medals. Not promotions. Not the way rookies look at you in the hallway." He looked back at King. "One moment. The moment you decide who you are." King's breath caught. Reed nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "When that day comes, you won't think of rank. You won't think of pride. You won't think of who's watching." His voice grew softer. "You'll think of the faces of the men who trusted you, including the ones who never made it home." A deep silence fell. King's eyes drifted downward. "Sir, how did you live with the ones you lost?" Reed didn't speak immediately. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small metal object, pressed it gently into King's palm. King looked down. A worn dog tag, edges smoothed by time, letters nearly rubbed away. Reed said quietly, "I don't live with them. I live for them." King felt something in his chest crack open. Reed rose to his feet. Go back to your Marines, Major. See them as they are, not as you expect them to be. And teach them what you learned tonight, before life teaches it the hard way. King stood too. General, thank you for everything. Reed placed a hand on his shoulder. Not heavy, but grounding. Don't thank me. Just become the man I know you can be. He stepped back. And Major, King straightened. Yes, sir. Next time you see an old man in a bar, don't assume he's just old. A rare, faint smile touched Reed's face. Some of us didn't survive this long by accident. He turned and walked away, fading into the shadows of the quiet street, moving with the calm certainty of a man who had lived more than he ever wanted to remember. King stayed there a long moment, dog tag clenched in his fist, the ocean wind brushing across his face. He felt the weight of it all, not the metal, the meaning. And he whispered into the dark, I won't waste this lesson. He tucked the dog tag inside his uniform and headed back toward the base. His stride was different now, not heavier, truer. A young officer entered the night that evening. A leader walked out of it.